There we go. All right. I'll have the chat open in case anybody on Twitch asks questions, but yeah, we'll just jump right into it, guys. I am here with Jordan Reid of the Draft Network. I want to talk to you a little bit today about obviously some prospect talk, a little bit about the Senior Bowl recap. I did read your Senior Bowl recap that you posted a day or two ago. And actually agreed with so many of your takes. But let's start with more about you, about the man behind just draft analysis. How did you get into this? I saw that you were a quarterback. You got into coaching and then recruiting, and now where you are now. So talk to me a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a unique story. And like you said, I started out as a quarterback at a small school called North Carolina Central University. It's in Durham, North Carolina. Everybody has heard of Duke before. It's about 5 minutes away from there. So my journey really started there in 2010. I started quarterback for 3 years there until 2013. And then I transitioned right into coaching. After that, I was a graduate assistant for 2 years, got my master's degree. And then one of our coaches actually left to get a head coaching job elsewhere. And then that opened up a full-time slot for me. So I was able to make that smooth transition into coaching. And I did that for about 5 years, I believe it was. Then after that, I just had some different aspirations. I wanted to get into journalism. Journalism is something that has always been near and dear to me, and the scouting is something that I really learned to love a little bit. My last 2 years at Central, I was the recruiting coordinator, which you mentioned a little bit earlier. And that's really where I learned my love for scouting, as far as, just visiting recruits in their household, seeing different moms and dads, different family backgrounds, and just learning stories. In general, I really fell in love with just putting all those puzzle pieces of a team together. I was fortunate enough to win 3 conference championships when I was at Central. So I got a wealth of experience. But the great thing about the experience that I got is not only did there's so many different lenses that I've seen the game from as a player, as a coach, and then now as a scout. And then once I stopped coaching, I was fortunate enough to get a job with the Draft Network. It was an upstart company, and they were looking for somebody with some scouting background and then some coaching and then playing experience. Well, and here I am today.
Okay, so I do actually have a couple questions then. One, the quick transition, was that a little bit intimidating? Like, next thing you know, you're going from a student to leading these guys, which as a quarterback, maybe not that challenging of a transition because you were the leader of the offense and you already kind of hold some of that responsibility. But what was that like in that moment? Kind of not realizing, I think a lot of kids come out of college, I don't know what I want to do. And next thing you know, you're taking on such a big role and so much responsibility. Did it feel natural because you already had that in you? What was that kind of like?
Well, being a quarterback, you already kind of have a pulse on how to lead certain individuals, just because you're really responsible for 10 other guys when you're out there on the field, but also off-season workouts. And then when you're at practice, you already have those natural leadership qualities instilled in you. But I would say it was a little bit of an awkward transition when I went from player to coach, just because the hardest thing for me was getting some of my former teammates to now see me as a coach. I had been a teammate for those guys for so long, but now they have to call me coach. So that was a little bit of an awkward transition. But once you started to kind of distance yourself a little bit from those guys, just because you have to understand your role and understand that you can't really hang out with those guys anymore. You can't really view them in that same similar light, just because if you do, they're still going to see you as Jordan Reid, the quarterback, as opposed to Coach Reid, which is now what I wanted to be referenced as. So I think that was one of the harder and kind of awkward transitions for me. But as the season went along and then I got more experience coaching, it became more of a natural transition for me.
Awesome. And then can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. Okay. I was able to get this working. So then that move to recruiting coordinator, where you said you fell in love with scouting, what made you take the recruiting coordinator job and move on from coaching soon after? And where did that kind of decision start? Did you know, I think I'm going to take that route a little bit? Was that in the back of your mind? Or did you take the recruiting coordinator job not knowing what was ahead?
So it kind of was forced on me, honestly. And Coach Mack, he's the offensive coordinator at Rice University now. He was the head coach that I worked under at the time when I was at Central. And he saw that the leadership qualities that I had, I was very organized. And then I just loved diving into the background of individuals. So he said, we're going to train you first as assistant recruiting coordinator. But, whenever you get that assistant tag, you have to prepare yourself for eventually running your own show. So that's something that I always knew was eventually going to come. And then those final 2 years, I knew exactly what I wanted to do as the recruiting coordinator. So it kind of was a job that really was forced upon me, but you're never ready. And this being in the sports field, you're never ready for anything that happens in life. So it was a little bit of an awkward transition once again for me being in that position so young. I think I was like 24 at the time. So it was a really, really unique role for me, but you learn as you go along. That's the thing about football. You start to gain the experience, and then you learn so many different things when you're in that role as well.
That's awesome. And so the move to the Draft Network. So now you're a recruiting coordinator. I'm kind of putting myself in your shoes a little bit. How did you know that that was going to be the right move, right? Or you don't know, but what made you take that chance to go with a startup versus working for a team as an NFL scout or working as a scout for college for high school players and things like that? Like, what made you feel like, all right, this is the next step?
So I've always been enamored with just the scouting process in general. I was that little kid that sat in front of the TV in the NFL draft back when it was 2 rounds, or back when it was 2 days long, excuse me. And my parents had to tell me to hey man, just go outside for a little bit, get out from in front of that TV. So my parents just always have to tell me with that. I've always been infatuated with the draft process. So I always wanted to figure out a way to combine football and then my journalism background, which is what I majored in when I was in college. So the Draft Network was a great opportunity for me, but also it was a great opportunity for me to stay around the game of football just because I couldn't imagine the game. I couldn't imagine my life without the game of football. I mean, I'm 29 years old now, and football has been a part of my life for 26 years now. So I just can't imagine myself not being a part of football in some form or fashion. So the Draft Network provided me with that opportunity, and it essentially was exactly what the NFL front office did. And even though we don't have as far as the intel or in-depth things like the NFL teams do have, it's kind of like from media's perspective, we do have a lot of inside information that a lot of those NFL teams do have as well.
Cool. That's so awesome. Okay. So then your favorite part of scouting, what do you like being on the road? Do you like kind of being in office, kind of just getting into your little zone and having your snacks nearby? What is your favorite part of the experience?
Well, the great thing about working in the media as opposed to coaching is I don't have to worry about wins and losses anymore. That's what I tell a lot of my scouting buddies that are in the NFL right now. But also, it's just learning the actual individuals that you're scouting. And I like to call myself a little bit of a different scout from a media perspective, just because obviously, like I said, we're not NFL teams. So we're not sitting down with these individuals and actually getting to know them in preparations for making the right decision on who we get to draft. But I still like to reach out to these individuals and get to meet them just because that goes back to my recruiting coordinator background, sitting in these in-home visits, getting to know mom and dad, getting to know the individuals and the family as a whole. And I've interviewed plenty of guys this year, plenty of previous years as well. And it's just my favorite part is just learning the background stories and why, or what makes them tick and what their exact why is of why they play the game.
Love that. I love that. Do you have a bit of a bias towards a specific position? Like, do you favor scouting quarterbacks or maybe receivers? You like who you're getting the ball to? Is there a favorite position when you're scouting?
Quarterbacks are always going to be my baby, just because
There
that's
we
what
go.
I played, and we're the most important position, not only in football but all the sports. Even if you
Yeah,
don't know anything about football, the quarterback is very important.
that's fair. That's so fair. And then, okay, so is that personality scouting? Like when you're interviewing players, do you think it gives? I'm not going to say it's not going to, move a guy up around, but does it give that extra boost because you know the energy that he might be bringing to the locker room, or what kind of teammate he could be, the attitude he'll have on the field during wins and losses? Do you think it factors in just a little bit?
I think it varies. It just depends on the individual that you're scouting and then the position as well, just because you have some quarterbacks that just like to lead. By example, like Justin Herbert from the Chargers. He's a guy that's not outspoken at all. And he kind of was knocked unfairly for that during the pre-draft process. But
Mhm.
on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have your guys that are your extroverts, or what I call your temperature risers. That's what I like to call them. Whenever they step in the room, the room temperature is going to rise just because of the energy that they bring. So it's just a matter of understanding who you're scouting and then how that translates into their game.
Love that. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Senior Bowl. I watched a lot of the broadcast. Um, It was fun. It was exciting. But when I was watching it, I didn't know if I was falling in love with some players a little bit more because the media was doing such a good job promoting these guys. And you were down there in Mobile.
No, I actually watched everything virtually.
Perfect. Okay, but you had the media pass, so you were able to see like practice film and all of that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what your scout eyes saw. Starting with Ian Book, what did you think of him? I think he looked a little bit more decisive from what I was watching. I remember those critical games versus Clemson. Maybe it was just the 2 games versus Clemson. Oh, Alabama as well. Those were my biggest concerns with him. Like the pressure came and he had nowhere to put the ball. Did you see that change at the Senior Bowl? Is that a change that you'll see transitioning into the NFL as well?
Yeah, well, the first thing we have to say about Book is that he's a winner. I mean, he's won 30 games in his career at Notre Dame, which is a huge accomplishment. I think he's second pretty much in every single statistical category. Obviously, Joe Montana, which everybody knows who that name was when he was playing for the Irish. So he's definitely a winner. One of the one of the best players in program history. But I thought he improved as the week went along. And that's something that you want to see from these quarterbacks, especially considering that he's probably going to be a late round guy. For the most part, you know that he's very smart. You know where he knows where to go with the football. And then, like I said, he's just a natural born leader and also a winner as well. But the big thing with quarterbacks is you want to see how they progress throughout the week of practice, just because I think of these all-star events, they are the one position that everybody, of course, likes to key in on. But there's so many different variables that they have to deal with, Malena. Yeah, you're talking about different terminology that they're used to as far as playbook, different weapons or surroundings. Some of these guys they didn't even know until they arrived in Mobile. And then you're talking about throwing to them on the perimeter as well. And then also dealing with all these different eyes on you with these scouts and evaluators as well. And it's really tough to play under pressure, especially considering that you're really going to be heavily graded from these 3 days of practice.
Okay. And so then that leads me into our next quarterback. I've got Kyle Trask questions. Do you think him not being able to participate in the Senior Bowl potentially knocks him and moves a guy like Ian Book above him for that QB6 spot? Maybe. Am I crazy for thinking that?
No, not at all. And he's one guy that's definitely going to be heavily debated just because of he didn't end the year as well as he wanted to. Everybody saw the bowl game against Oklahoma. They didn't play that well down the backstretch of the year in the SEC championship game either. So he didn't end the year as well as he would have liked. But a lot of people were looking forward to seeing him playing in this event. And myself, I wanted to see him go out there and compete, but he did have an injury. So I don't think it should move the needle for him either way. But there's going to be various opinions that you see out there about him, but I would have liked to see him go down there and compete, but he had an injury situation that he had to deal with. So we can't really knock him for that, in my honest opinion.
That's fair. And then that next round of guys, I just feel like they're all cluttered in my mind a little bit. And so then we think about Jamie Newman, who I was excited about for the move to Georgia. I remember hearing, though, a lot of scouts talking about how maybe that wasn't going to be the best move for him. He should have stayed at Wake and things like that. Do you think that his draft stock would be higher had he stayed at Wake Forest and still been passing to Sage Surratt?
Oh, absolutely. Just because we knew he was going to put up big numbers when he was at Wake Forest. And I actually like the move to Georgia. I just wish we could have seen him play. And I think he kind of hurt himself a little bit when he came out and essentially said he was going to opt out during training camp, just because what it made it seem like was that he was running away from competition a little bit with JT Daniels. And we don't know what really happened with that situation. We're not Kirby Smart. We don't know what happened behind the scenes there, but that's just what it seemed like. That's what it seemed like to a lot of scouts that I talked to. But he was up and down a little bit at the Senior Bowl, and this was a huge resume situation for him just because the last time we saw him was basically 2 years ago at Wake Forest. It's been so long since we've seen him throw. And then the game was something that a lot of people were looking forward to seeing how he would play as well. So I don't know where his draft stock is going to be just because there's only so much you can put into the Senior Bowl. But his Wake Forest tape, I thought it was a little bit inconsistent, but I still think he's definitely a draftable guy. I do think he's probably going to go somewhere in day 3 if I had to guess. But once again, like Kyle Trask and some of these other quarterbacks, I don't think the Senior Bowl is definitely going to move the needle a whole bunch.
Got it. Awesome. And then with so much QB need this year, I think so much QB need is the only way I can describe that. Lots of change happening with veterans, aging veterans, injuries, and everything that you can imagine at that core position. Do you think a guy like Mac Jones moves up the board higher than he would in any other draft year? Is he deserving of that top 10 maybe pick? Top 10 might be heavy, but it could happen. So is he deserving of, even like if he goes in the top 10, top 15, would you put him there anyway? Or is this year going to move him up?
It wouldn't surprise me if he goes top 15, honestly. And a lot of people have been targeting the Patriots at 15 just because he seems like a quarterback that they would fall in love with. But as far as his performance at the Senior Bowl, I thought he significantly helped himself just because the one thing you hear about Alabama quarterbacks, including Mac Jones, is that they play with the best of the best as far as having a huge arsenal of players that they are surrounded by. He has heavy artillery and, throwing to Jalen Waddle, the Heisman winner, Devontae Smith. And then he previously threw to Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs as well. So we knew he had a full arsenal of weapons. But now at the Senior Bowl, you can't use that excuse for him anymore just because he's throwing to basically all new players. And I thought he went down there and did a really good job of what he needed to do. So I think he's going to end up being a first-round pick, in my honest opinion, just because some team is going to be left at the altar without somebody beside them as far as a quarterback, an answer at quarterback. But we're seeing some of these veterans starting to move around. We saw the Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff trade, which shocked a lot of people. We're seeing crazy rumors about Kirk Cousins and, some of these other quarterbacks around the league as well. Jimmy Garoppolo is another one that the 49ers seem to be set to move on from. So I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to have a new starter in the center in 2021.
Do you think need pushes him up, or is that a place that he should be regardless?
Oh, yeah, he's going to – every year we see quarterbacks pushed up just because, once again, it's the most important position in the game. So teams are going to be desperate to get that spot right. And the key to roster building that we've seen in years past, the Seahawks in 2012 really started this blueprint, is that if you have a cheap quarterback under center, you can really construct the rest of your team how you want. But once those guys get older, once that quarterback starts to get a little bit of experience and then you have to end up paying him, it's really hard to build a serviceable roster after that. So every team is going to be searching for that young option under center that can lead them to the next Super Bowl. And it wouldn't surprise me if Mac Jones does end up being a first-round pick for that reason.
Totally fair. All right. A little bit veering off of the quarterback talk, some other big names that were down there. And I feel like the edge rushers are starting to separate themselves a little bit in this class. And I think about the Pitt guys in Rashad Weaver, and name is slipping my mind, Patrick Jones, and then Gregory Rousseau and Jalen Phillips there at Miami. So what are your thoughts on the Pitt versus Miami edge guys?
Yeah, this was the top groups in the ACC, and we went back and forth. And we didn't even mention another one from Miami, and Quincy Roche, who's another one.
I forgot it. Yes. Yep.
It was another one that's going to be drafted probably somewhere late day 2, early day 3 as well. And all of them have their different types of skill sets. It's just a matter of what type of flavor you like. Rousseau is, even though we didn't get to see him this year, anytime you're 6'6", 260 pounds, and then you go out and get 15 and a half sacks and basically your second year ever playing the position, you're going to get a lot of attention from scouts. And he's one guy I've really developed a nice relationship with while he's been opted out. I've interviewed him a couple of times. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where he does end up going in the draft. I think he's probably going to end up being a top 15 pick. If I was a betting man, I definitely would put money on him being that early of a selection. But I really like these Pitt edge rushers. And Patrick Jones, he's one. He just brings so much energy. I love everything that he brings to the table. Rashad Weaver, his stats were better, very explosive coming off the edge. Played a little bit inside at the Senior Bowl, which I really liked seeing from him as well. But one that I was really surprised this year by was Jalen Phillips from Miami, just because of the story. Coming from UCLA, he had a lot of challenges that he faced off of the field. And I just loved how he was able to persevere. He's another player that I've conversated with back and forth over the past couple of weeks or so, just getting to know his story, some things that happened with him, what happened at UCLA, and some of the off the field things that were happening with him. So really cheering for him. I think he's a player that's skyrocketing up boards right now. And I think he's the best pass rusher as far as just how creative he is with his hands in this draft class.
That's fair. Even above who? Shaka Toney at Penn State?
Penn State. I think he's better than all those guys. Kwity Paye.
Oh, I'm taking. All right, I'm holding on to that nugget. And then we talk about receivers. So we have another deep wide receiver class. My question and potential concern, if you will, here. Are we going to see teams start to slow on picking wide receivers, similar to how you don't see running backs, like people rushing to get running backs because you can find a guy like that in round 3? Are we going to see that kind of move at the receiver position, or because this league is just pass happy, do you not see that happening?
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, just because this is kind of slowly starting to become the new trend with wide receivers, just because you're starting to see guys like that were day 2 picks like DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin. The list goes on of some of these guys that have came in and had immediate success. But some of these guys that have went in the first round, they haven't even come close to the type of production that a lot of those guys have been able to get early on as rookies, and then even continuing on with that continuity, and then even that type of consistency throughout the early stages of their career. So it's starting to trend in the direction like, let's just go with another position and then take our chances with the receiver on day 2, just because that's kind of been like the money zone for them. And going even back to 2017, 2018, 2019, you can rip off so many different names that have had success. Devontae Adams is another one that was found in the 2nd round that's going on to become one of the best receivers in the NFL. So I think you're definitely onto something there as far as taking wide receivers on day 2.
Okay, fair enough. I will keep then a lookout for that. Do you have, so these weapons, the dual positionless pieces, if you will? I liked Demetric Felton. I wasn't sure, again, if the broadcast is making me fall in love with him, but I love how they discussed he's a running back, played running back all year at UCLA, but then made the switch, not switch, but practiced a lot at wide receiver at the Senior Bowl. Do you have a comp for a guy like that? I don't love comps because I know every player is unique. So I will say that, but just to give me a reference point of what I could expect maybe to see in the NFL with him. Soft comp.
One that was floated out there for him was Nyheim Hines from the Colts, who spent some time
him this
at
year.
NC State. Yeah, at NC State. And he's a player that's gone on to be very productive for the Colts. And I think Felton could serve a type of role like that, as far as spending some time at running back and then spending some time out on the perimeter at wide receiver as well. So I think Nyheim Hines is one that was floated out there that I really like for him. And he's a player that really surprised me as far as what he did at the Senior Bowl, considering that he did not spend a whole bunch of time at wide receiver, but he looked so polished out there on the perimeter, and he looked really comfortable. I was really surprised by that.
That's awesome. Opposite side of the ball, I want to talk a little bit about linebackers, because there seems to be a lot of pieces there in this draft class. Again, I have a lot of names in my head. I'm still trying to separate the pack a little bit here. So when I think about like a Jabril Cox, I know that he can cover really well too, played some at safety this week. Justin Hilliard over there at Ohio State, but he was there with 2 or 3 other of his Ohio State teammates, and then Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who I've liked since the beginning of the 2020 season there at Notre Dame. Help me separate these names.
I have to ask you this. You must be a Notre Dame fan. You have to.
I'm not. I'm from New Jersey. So I went to Rutgers. So I'm a Rutgers fan. I have to be a fan of the school that I went to. But I respect then a lot of different football teams. I know that Greg Schiano is getting our Scarlet Knights back together. So I'll be able to really heavily root for them soon. But as far as all the other teams, I think that's why I get to pay attention to a lot of football and show a lot of respect to the rest of the schools that are currently on the big stages.
Completely understand. Believe it or not, we played Rutgers my redshirt freshman year.
Shut up. That's awesome.
Who was the quarterback? His last name was Dodd. He had blonde hair. It was when Mohamed Sanu was there as well. We played against
I remember the Sanu era, and then were the McCourty twins on the other side?
I believe so.
That was like the prime. I was not in college at that time, but I wish.
I'm showing my age a little bit, but
no, I'm just right behind you. It's okay.
I got you. But the linebackers, yeah, I thought they had a good week overall. Jabril Cox, I'll just start with him. Started off his career at North Dakota State. Yep. Standout player there, won every single award that you can think of as far as a defensive player in that conference. Very active. free flowing. That's what I love to describe him as. Very good in coverage, as you mentioned. He showed that throughout the week in the one-on-ones going against the running backs, and then also the tight ends as well. Justin Hilliard, who came on really late, was a 6-year senior, if I'm not mistaken, for Ohio State. So he was there for a very long time, and he came on really well with them suffering some injuries down the backstretch of the year. He was able to show off exactly what he was capable of, especially in the national championship game. He played really well, even though they didn't come up on the winning end. He was a player that shined really nicely in that game. So, and there's plenty of other players that played well in the game. Chaz Surratt from North Carolina is another one that I thought had a really good week as well. And Baron Browning, who is Justin Hilliard's counterpart at Ohio State, I thought he had a fantastic week as well.
Awesome. Okay. Why did you think I was a Notre Dame fan? Oh, because of the book club and
you had some great reviews about Ian Book, and then Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who's an outstanding player as well. Your face just lit up when talking about both of those guys, so I thought you were an Irish girl.
Okay, so my thoughts there, I was not always excited when Notre Dame was on the screen this year. I know, I'm sorry. Respect to the Fighting Irish. So when there were names that really popped to me, like Owusu-Koramoah specifically, he really stood out. Like when I'm watching a team that doesn't excite me, I want to say that very lightly because I know these fan bases are aggressive. So when I watch teams that don't really excite me, when I do see a player that really stands out, my mind just remembers them.
I mean, he's one that definitely needs to be remembered. I think he's going to end up being a first-round player. So Owusu-Koramoah is a really good prospect.
Nice. And then a little bit of defensive back talk. I have so many questions. So DBs, I didn't get in depth too much on today's rundown, and the offensive line are two that I could probably go on for like an hour with questions on them alone. But I wanted to ask about Richie Grant, safety out of UCF. I know that his teammate Aaron Robinson was down there too, playing at corner. It's not specifically about Richie, but if you do have any comments on him, feel free. I mainly wanted to know why we see a safety like him play some snaps at corner when they're down at something like the Senior Bowl or All-Star games.
Well, the great thing about that is at the Senior Bowl, you want to show as much as you can do as possible, whether it's playing different positions or special teams. There's so many different aspects that you want to show about your game just because there's scouts taking notes everywhere that you go, whether it's when you step on the elevator or whenever you step on the football field. They're going to be taking notes, whatever you do, your mannerisms that you give off, whether you're a reserve player or outspoken leader. These are things that they're writing down. And I love telling the story about Terry McLaurin just because this was my first year at the Senior Bowl when he was down there. And the one thing that I'll never forget about Terry McLaurin is how hard he went on special teams. And I had no idea that he played special teams coming to the event, but he went as hard at special teams as he did in the one-on-one portions of practice. And he ended up being a third-round selection. And we see it's been all she wrote. After that, he's been an absolute fantastic player. So the one thing that I love to harp on about some of these prospects is that you always want to show as much as possible as you can do. So I wrote that in my rundown as far as my recap of where Richie Grant was playing cornerback, but also safety as well. So he was showing off that versatility that scouts love to see.
Love that. And then do you put a guy like that potentially at like a nickel position, so it just kind of gives that versatility?
Yeah, so I just like to call those all of the above players.
Boom. Love that.
What position he plays. Does he play cornerback? Does he play safety? Does he play nickel? I just say all of the above.
I love that. And that actually transitions me into the next question. These positionless players amuse me and intrigue me so much. I want to see way more of it when I think of Isaiah Simmons, Jabril Cox, on the offense, Demetric Felton, Chase Claypool, who obviously has a bigger tight end type body, but he plays receiver. Darren Waller, Kyle Pitts, the list goes on. When you think of these positionless players, does that force coaches to get more creative? What do we see from the coaching aspect? Because I think that challenges coaches, and I think then we could see these players not living up to their full potential. Mm-hmm. How do you think that changes the landscape of coaching in the future?
That's a great point. And I love to say this about positionless players. Everybody loves talking about positionless players, but the hard part is just having a plan for them. Just because what happens when you don't have a plan for them is that they're not able to settle into a certain spot. And then they get confused trying to do one thing when they need to do a certain thing for another position. So you have to have a plan with these guys. And that happened early on during Isaiah Simmons' rookie year. They really didn't know what position to play him at. He had the bad game against the 49ers of where they just had him at disadvantageous situations. But during the back half of the year, they just rolled him out there and they just put him everywhere and they just said, go make plays. So you just have to have a certain plan for these guys walking through the door, stick to that plan. And then that's when you allow them to play all over the place once they get comfortable in a certain spot.
Okay, so you think we see progress from pieces like that into
Absolutely.
years 2 and 3 and as they learn their scheme a little bit more?
Absolutely.
Got it. Awesome. I think I touched on this edge question a little bit earlier, and I think that you did cover it. With this edge class, I don't see strong separation. I think we're starting to now with all-star games and then probably through when they're at their own school and pro days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you think we'll start to see separation there and it's essentially preference with some of these top guys?
Yeah, so the tricky thing about the edge group and then also wide receivers is that the huge tiebreakers that teams used to use was the actual combine, where they're doing the testing, and then you're also doing essentially what I like to call speed dating with them, where you're in these 15-minute interviews and you're starting to get to know them, not only off the field, but also getting to know their personality. What were some of their mess ups throughout the year if they have some off the field red flags, but they're not going to get those opportunities this year as far as sitting down with them at the combine and then the testing either. So the pro days are going to be huge for a lot of guys this year. And I don't know how teams are going to separate this edge tier this year, just because you have guys like Kwity Paye from Michigan at the top, Gregory Rousseau, who we mentioned early on in the show as well. But there's some other guys that have come along here lately, like a Jalen Phillips from Miami. But teams are not going to get to sit down and just ask him what happened or why he transferred from UCLA or what happened when you were at UCLA and how did you or why, what made you grow up so much from Miami or from UCLA to Miami, excuse me. So little things like that and little details are something that NFL teams are really going to be missing. So it's just a matter of getting intel from individuals that you trust this year.
Awesome. And now a class that I think it seems top heavy, kind of a little bit of the opposite of what we're seeing with an array of strong edge rushers. I feel like the cornerback class is Surtain and Farley. I'm probably missing somebody in that top 3 and then a steep drop off. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So what happens there? And also a guy that has been on my radar since week 1 in 2020. I didn't hear this name throughout draft season last year, L'Jarius Sneed.
Yeah.
He came out of nowhere. And since game 1, he showed us I am an NFL talent. Who's the L'Jarius Sneed of this class?
Ooh, you put me on the spot with that. So I'll start with the first half of your question. So the top 3 guys I'll start at the top with Patrick Surtain, the second from Alabama. There's a lot of talk about him. Caleb Farley from Virginia Tech. And then also J.C. Horn from South Carolina, who had a really good year this year. Those are really considered like the top 3 guys this year. But after that, there's a bit of a precipitous drop-off. Then you're getting into guys like Eric Stokes Jr. from Georgia. And then there's plenty of other players in that second tier as well of we don't really know where these guys are going to go. And Asante Samuel Jr. from Florida State is another name that a lot of people are buzzing about right now. So we really don't know where some of these guys are going to go, but we know who the firm top 3 guys are. But if I had to pick one that is a L'Jarius Sneed this year, I would go with Eric Stokes Jr. I'm a big fan of him from Georgia. So remember that name. I think he's probably going to end up being a second-round pick. He's not going to go as late as Sneed did, but it wouldn't surprise me if he goes on to have the success like Sneed did have during his rookie season. And like you said, he was a player that a lot of people didn't really know a whole bunch about coming into his rookie year. And, I mean, kudos to the Chiefs. It just seems like they can't do anything wrong now.
Miss. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually do have a question that bounces off of that. So we're seeing this deep receiving class and the potential of finding talent in the second round. Caleb Farley, if I'm not mistaken, transitioned from receiver. Did he flip to
So he played quarterback to corner.
Oh, whoa. Didn't okay. I thought he was receiver to corner. All right.
No,
Quarterback to
you're
corner.
right. So he played quarterback in high school, and then he
Got
played
it.
receiver coming to Virginia Tech, and then he went to cornerback. So you are correct. My apologies.
No, appreciate that clarification. So, do we see maybe in the future a lot of these wide receivers hoping to make that move and switching over to corner because of the need at corner? These guys could be getting themselves paid at the next level, right?
Yeah, definitely. And what happens a lot of times with receivers that just get lost or they just get lost in the shuffle on the depth chart, coaches just transition them over to the other side just because it's harder, of course, backpedaling and guarding wide receivers, but you know a lot of the techniques and tactics that they're trying to accomplish. So cornerback is a much harder position as far as from a natural instincts standpoint and athleticism, but there's so many things that are so valuable when you're making that transition just because you've pretty much demonstrated all the techniques that they're trying to do, excuse me, and then the route concepts that they're trying to run against you as well. You pretty much know a lot of those as far as the basic stuff. It's just a matter of digesting and then demonstrating the proper techniques that you need to do at the position. And we've seen plenty of players in years past transition from wide receiver to corner and have a lot of success.
Right, just kind of flipping it in your mind, and now you're backpedaling, and so it shifts it a little bit. Okay, all right. So, last question for you: what does homework look like for you over the next couple of months, especially without the draft? How does it look a little bit different for you this year?
So the process of just writing scouting reports is something that I really do from sun up to sundown. You're just pretty much watching tape of different individuals. You're writing down certain attributes that you see about them, what you like, what you dislike, what you think they need to work on, and then you give them an actual grade. And the grade is just based on what you think they eventually can become, but you have to use some nuance a little bit and just grade them exactly what they are right now coming into the league. So that's something that we sit down, we meet about every day with the Draft Network. We have certain areas. I have the SEC, the Big 12, and then also some FCS and lower tier schools, Division II, Division III. So I'm a pretty busy individual with schools like Alabama and Georgia and
Right.
recruiting and, just doing all of those guys and writing them up. But it's fun just studying the background of them as well, getting to know their story. Since we don't actually talk to a lot of the guys, I've been fortunate enough to interview some guys when I have written them up, but just getting on Zoom like some of these teams have been able to, we're not afforded those type of opportunities on a day-to-day basis. But I've really enjoyed just writing guys up, getting to know them, the ins and outs, what makes them tick, and then their strengths and weaknesses overall.
Love that. Love that. Good luck. It sounds like
Appreciate it.
quite a bit of work.
Yeah,
But I'm excited. I'm excited to see how this class pans out. Thank you so much for your time. This was fun. I will probably be hitting you up with a couple questions here and there as I hear some names throughout the coming months. But best of luck to you. I'll talk to you soon. And thanks for joining.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Anytime you need me, just let me know.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Thanks for joining.